Okay, so quick question. What's the grossest thing you'd let happen to your own body for science? Take your time. Now compare it to this. A woman deliberately let a bug crawl into her foot, live there, grow there, and lay eggs there for 2 months on purpose, and she didn't even flinch. Her name is Marlene Thielke, and I promise you, by the end of this, you're going to have a completely different definition of scientific dedication. Let's set the scene. The creature in question is called a sand flea, and don't let the cute little name fool you. This thing is nightmare fuel with legs. A female sand flea doesn't just bite you and move on like a normal flea. She burrows headfirst into your skin, usually somewhere around the foot, and once she's in, she is not leaving. She swells up under there, sometimes to the size of a small pea, feeding on your blood the entire time. She lays hundreds of eggs while she's at it, and after about 4 to 6 weeks, she just dies, right there, still inside you. There's an actual medical name for this delightful experience. It's called tungiasis, and it's a real problem in parts of Africa, South America, and the Caribbean. Left untreated, it can cause infection, ulcers, and in bad cases, people have literally lost toes over it. So this isn't some quirky bug bite. This is a legitimately dangerous parasite, which makes Thielke's decision even more, let's say, bold. So here's the actual scientific mystery she was chasing. Researchers knew a fair amount about sand fleas already, but there was one very specific, very important detail nobody had nailed down. Where exactly does mating happen? Does it happen outside, on the ground before she burrows in, or does it happen after, once she's already snug inside a human host? I know. Sounds like an oddly specific question to risk your foot over, but in parasitology, tiny specific questions like that can unlock huge practical answers. Because if you know exactly when and where these things reproduce, you know exactly where to interrupt the cycle and stop the infection before it spreads. So Thielke made a decision that most sane humans would immediately reject. She let a sand flea burrow into her own foot, and then, instead of doing what every fiber of your body is screaming at you to do right now, which is rip it out immediately, she let it stay for 2 straight months. She basically turned her own foot into a research lab. Picture that for a second. This wasn't some quick 5-minute procedure. This was weeks of a living creature slowly growing under her skin, a lump getting bigger and bigger that she had to protect and monitor instead of yanking out the second it got uncomfortable. Every itch, every twinge, every weird sensation was data to her, not just something to complain about. She had to override one of the most basic human instincts that exists. Something's under my skin, get it out, now. She did the opposite, on purpose, for 60 days straight. Why on earth would anyone actually go through with that? Couldn't she just study this in a lab with tissue samples or lab animals instead? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Some biological processes are shockingly hard to study accurately outside of a real, living host. A lab setup can't perfectly replicate the temperature, blood flow, hormones, and skin chemistry of an actual human body. So if you want a definitive, no doubt about it answer to whether mating happens before or after burrowing, sometimes the only real way to know is to watch it happen live, in real tissue, as it's actually occurring. And it paid off. Through direct observation, she confirmed that mating almost certainly happens after the female has burrowed in, not before. A small, precise answer to a very specific question. And getting it required something most researchers on Earth would never sign up for. Think about that trade for a second. 2 months of discomfort, real risk of infection, an actual living creature laying eggs inside her body, all to settle one narrow line in a scientific paper that most people will never read. And she'd probably tell you it was worth it. Here's the part that might surprise you though. Thielke isn't some one-off case of extreme scientific commitment. Self-experimentation has a long, weird, and honestly kind of legendary history in science. And once you start looking, you find it everywhere. Take Barry Marshall, Australian doctor, working in the 1980s. Back then, everyone agreed stomach ulcers were caused by stress and spicy food. Case closed. Textbook fact. Marshall thought otherwise. He believed a specific bacteria, Helicobacter pylori, was the real culprit. Nobody wanted to hear it. So what did he do? He drank a solution full of live H. pylori bacteria, deliberately infected himself. Within days, he developed the exact kind of severe stomach inflammation linked to ulcers. His own body became undeniable proof that no journal article could argue with. Years later, he won the Nobel Prize in medicine for it. Or go back even further, 1929, a young German doctor named Werner Forssmann wants to know if you can safely thread a catheter into the human heart through a vein. His superiors say, absolutely not. Way too dangerous. So Forssmann just does it to himself, inserts a catheter into his own arm, guides it toward his heart while literally watching the X-ray of his own chest happening in real time. It works. That single insane act of self-experimentation eventually became the entire foundation of modern cardiac catheterization. He got a Nobel Prize too. There's an even more recent one, actually pretty close to Thelica's world. A British scientist named James Logan wanted to understand exactly how a hookworm behaves once it's inside the human body, not textbook diagrams, the real thing. So he deliberately infected himself with hookworm larvae and swallowed a tiny camera to film the parasite moving through his own digestive system from the inside. Cramping, fatigue, the whole miserable experience, all in the name of footage no illustration could ever fully capture. You're starting to see the pattern here, right? None of these people were being reckless just for the thrill of it. They were stuck. Regular methods, animal models, theoretical debates, none of it was convincing enough. So they turned to the one test subject they could fully control and never had to argue with about consent, themselves. There's a psychological angle to this too, beyond just raw bravery. Self-experimentation tends to show up exactly at the point where a researcher hits a wall between what they know is true and what everyone else refuses to believe. It's not really about collecting more data at that point, it's about certainty. When something happens directly to your own body, doubt gets a whole lot harder to hold on to, both for you and for anyone watching you prove it. There's also this strange intimacy to the method that you just don't get any other way. Studying a parasite through a microscope keeps you at a distance, an outside observer looking through glass. Letting that same parasite live under your own skin, that distance disappears completely. You're not just observing the experiment anymore, you are the experiment. Some researchers have described that shift as weirdly clarifying, almost meditative, because it forces total attention onto one single process in a way reading about it never could, which is part of what makes Thelica's choice so fascinating psychologically, not just scientifically. She didn't settle for distant, indirect data. She chose the version of evidence that left zero room for doubt, even though it came with an actual living organism inside her foot for 2 months. So naturally, this raises a fair question. Where's the line between admirable scientific dedication and just plain reckless? People who study self-experimentation point out it's not random at all. The people who actually do this tend to share certain traits: an unusually high tolerance for physical discomfort, motivation that comes from inside, not from outside pressure, and almost always, a razor-specific question they need answered, not just vague curiosity. It's rarely a spur-of-the-moment thing. It's usually what happens after every other option has already been exhausted, and the researcher has decided the value of a definite answer is worth the personal cost of getting it. There's also a genuinely important ethics question buried in here. Self-experimentation lives in a strange gray zone. When you experiment on someone else, there are review boards, oversight, informed consent, entire systems built specifically to protect that person. When you experiment on yourself, a lot of that protection just doesn't apply the same way, because you're both the researcher and the subject at once. That's exactly why this kind of research is rare, controversial, and, in most modern institutions today, actively discouraged. Ethics committees now generally require the same level of scrutiny for self-experimentation as for any other human subject, because researchers can talk themselves into underestimating the risk they're taking, convinced the cost is smaller than it really is. And yet, it keeps happening, generation after generation, field after field, because sometimes the fastest, clearest route to an answer really does run straight through the researcher's own body. Which brings us back to where we started. A scientist deliberately letting a parasite live inside her foot for 2 months, not out of carelessness, but out of a very deliberate, very specific hunt for an answer nobody else could give her. It's uncomfortable to think about. It's also, in its own weird way, one of the purest expressions of scientific curiosity you'll ever come across. So next time you hear about some bizarre scientific discovery and think, how did anyone even figure that out? Remember Marlene Thelica. Remember that sometimes the answer wasn't sitting in a lab report or a clean, controlled trial at all. Sometimes it was found the hard way, quite literally under someone's own skin, because they refused to just accept not knowing. And somewhere out there right now, there's probably another researcher staring down some equally strange question, wondering if they're about to make the exact same call she did.